I love getting into the readings themselves and the people who had the readings. And I found a wonderful case study, I think, of someone who received some very significant readings, just two. And tonight I not only want to put a name to that, I want to put a face to it. George Conjar, 3085. We're very fortunate because in 1998, as part of the program that the ARE has long been doing to document the readings, to prove the readings, in 1998, Paul Mazza with CNN, who is a volunteer, who sits on our board tonight, joined Jeanette Thomas, who was head of the Edgar Cayce Foundation, and they went and they talked to George and they interviewed him. And so we're going to do this in sections. And the first section is an interview with George Conjar. It was conducted in 1998, and so we'll see little excerpts from that interview in his own words. So we'll start there, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper in the surface. Kevin, are you up there with us? Okay.
I was a junior in high school, and we had a particularly violent game in Lancaster. We were playing Lancaster Catholic, I remember that. It rained the entire game. And the next morning, I woke up and I was sick. And I had this like bloody sputum at that time already, occurring. I was very sick, I had pneumonia. I was in bed for a solid 6 weeks. When I became well, which would have been, say, about the first of the year of 1940, after the Christmas holiday, I went back to school. I was either given a tuberculin test or I'd had one before that was positive. So I was x-rayed, and then the doctor, I remember the visit with him when he explained the problem to me. And he actually gave me my chart to hand deliver to the preventorium. I remember what the chart said. It said, incipient stage of tuberculosis, recommend 3-month treatment at the preventorium. The doctor that sent me there thought that I'd have no problem in being well in a few months. And so that was the purpose in sending me. But unfortunately, when they x-rayed me to discharge me and make sure everything was okay, the reverse had happened to me. The condition had progressed, and had progressed seriously to where I went from an incipient stage designation to a moderately advanced stage. X-rays were given to us every 6 months as a norm, but in my case there was reason to give me some extra ones. The treatment available for tuberculosis was primarily arresting of the lung. And the bed rest was common for people that were not infected terribly and might have been sufficient. The second treatment was pneumothorax, which was the insertion of air between your chest wall and your lung. The purpose of collapsing the lung was to rest it so that it could cure these small cavities that the tuberculosis bacilla was creating. And that was my first treatment on my left lung when that occurred. Sometime shortly after that, I went into pleural shock. I think it's called pleural shock. But anyway, I was coming down from a treatment and walking down to the first floor to my room, and I collapsed. And they had to carry me into the bed, and they stuck, like about 15 or 20 blankets on me to try to get this in control. and couldn't throughout that day and that night. The next morning I was okay, back to normal again. But I almost died that night from what they told me. But that was not as a result of tuberculosis. It was actually this shock that I'd gone into from this treatment. And then did a phrenic nerve crush, which is it's a nerve right here in the neck. And I still have the scar there somewhere. It paralyzed your diaphragm and prevented your lung from pushing in and out. And so that was done, and that was another method of treatment. Then ultimately, the disease spread to my right lung. Then I really became sick. I had steadily progressed from an incipient stage of tuberculosis to a far advanced stage. I had gotten to the point where I thought that I would be dying. Then the final treatment, if all this failed, was to remove all the ribs out of your rib cage and permit the flesh of your body to collapse in and arrest the movement of that lung entirely. I then got involved with a few other patients that were in a similar situation. The member of the association gave me the book to read, There's a River, and then that started my relationship with Edgar Cayce. I was at the tuberculosis sanatorium in South Mountain, Pennsylvania. I arrived there probably in April, right after my 16th birthday of 1940. And then I was there until, I believe, July of 43. There was no doubt in my mind when I had that reading in hand, but that I was going to live, that here was the answer to my problem. So I don't remember leaving, but I must have left like 5 minutes after the mail came. The diet was unique, and that there were a lot of yellow vegetables called for. I remember my mother making me sweet potatoes or yams almost every day. I remember eating all the carrots. I remember walking myself for the raw milk that I had to take. You could buy a charred oak keg very easily back in 1943. I remember my father drilling those holes, and he stuck 2 corks in it. Actually, I was like so well, so fast. And when the state clinic doctor told me that x-ray was like absolutely perfect for, what I was looking for, well, then you're young and you're well, and so what do you do? And you forget your ordeal and a lot of things you do. But I did, I tried to lead the good life that Edgar Cayce suggested. My only regret is that I never got to go back down to Virginia Beach as I wanted to do it, and to meet Edgar Cayce and then talk to him, but that never occurred. I'm satisfied that Edgar Cayce was the saint in my life.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story, and it gets better. It gets richer, because as you put flesh and blood to these readings, as you start really investigating, the story is so much more than a 16, 17-year-old boy getting cured from tuberculosis. You start digging into it, and you start realizing the things that Nancy has been talking about the spiritual elements, about joy of living, about how we're a multi-dimensional body. These are things that are difficult to pick up when you're just paging through the readings. And you might just pass, 3085, oh, here's a TB reading, and that's all you see in it. But I want to dig a little deeper. George Conjar, born Steelton, Pennsylvania. This is just across the river from Harrisburg. You know it today because of the former home of Bethlehem Steel. went bankrupt in 2001, reorganized. So Steelton, like Harrisburg, like so many of this region, became the Rust Belt. This is really, as we know it today, today, just like then, back in George's early days, it was a primarily Roman Catholic community, immigrant community. St. Patrick's Cathedral here in Harrisburg is a real foundation, real anchor in the community. This is the Bishop Devitt High School. Back in George's days, it was simply called Harrison Central. It's the Catholic school. Has graduated thousands and thousands of students. But just like the steel company closed down, this school too in 2012 actually shut down and moved outside the city. But when the reading took place, it was back in the 30s. But let's see if we go back further. So picture Steelton in the 1920s. Steelton at that time, population 16,000 people. That's 4 times what it is today. Almost entirely, well over 98% immigrants. Invariably poor, mostly Serbs, Croatians, Slovaks. They lived in small neighborhoods throughout the city, and they worked various parts in the steel plant, whether it was the blast furnaces, the steel mills, and this was what George's family lived and grew up. George was one of 9 children. His father was illiterate. George and his family, grew up right in this, serious, smoggy, noisy atmosphere. This is a great picture. This is one of the earliest pictures I was able to find. Is not George's father. This is at his confirmation. This is Frank. And this is young George, probably 10, 11 years old at his confirmation. But in many respects, George was going to live out his parents' dreams because, his mother and father worked terribly hard. George was going to get an education, and he got it. He was smart. He learned to read very early. He was also a very gifted athlete, a football player. This really doesn't show up in the readings, but as you go into it, you begin to discover how important these little things are. This is, although he had 9 siblings, this is his mother up here, I think, on the right, Barbara. He has a sister, Catherine, who later becomes a nun. This is George up in the back, very happy time. Let's jump ahead a few more years here. This is when George is going to Harrison Central, the primary Catholic school, but he's a smart guy. He's not only smart, but he's loved. As a junior in high school, he was president of his junior class. He was also a very gifted football player, a guard. And you got to realize this is Steelton. This is the area which probably produced more U.S. football players during this period of time than anywhere else in the United States. These were children of steel workers. They were big, they were strong, and George was on the team. This was a big coup. And this is really where his challenges started, because he was at an away game, Lancaster, which is another Catholic school. And he got injured in the football game. This was the middle of October. He was laid up in bed. He got pneumonia. Started deteriorating. So he didn't go back to class that semester, but he seemed to get better. He got much better, and in January he showed back up at school. Only TB at this time, was a serious problem. the whole country was mobilizing to do something about it. So there was mandatory TB testing. So he goes back to school in January, and he, like the rest of his class, is tested, and he tests positive. Non-symptomatic, but he's got TB. In other words, he hasn't started manifesting the symptoms, but he's infected. And of course, TB at this time in the 30s, it was the scourge of the world. Certainly a huge problem in the United States. Sanitariums were opening up all over the country. The irony, of course, as I was telling some people today, is Edgar Cayce was giving TB readings back in 1909. People were getting better. His own wife, in 1910 was cured of TB. So, you wonder how different this might have been had the Cayce health treatment for TB actually gotten out there. But because the whole country was mobilizing, because something had to be done, George was remanded to what's called a preventorium. Now, think of this, 15 years old. He was actually one of the older children, but a preventorium is where children were sent, sometimes as young as 2 months, sometimes as old as 16, but rarely after 16. With the idea is you take the family, take the children out of their homes, and you put them in this new environment, in the woods preferably, fresh air, lots of sunlight, and maybe you can stop the disease. So George was sent to the South Mountain Preventorium, as he described here. What he didn't describe is how much he loved it. This was one of the first times he was out of Steelton for any extended period of time. And this place, as he described it, it was like summer camp. It was like the summer camp I never had. As he describes in the interview, plenty of trees. This is about 53 miles southwest of Harrisburg. He loved walking in the woods. There's a forest. This was the children's playground. He and about 30 patients at this point were living in this home, and it was a beautiful home, indoor swimming pool, very nice. And as George says in his interview, it's the first time he was getting 3 square meals, as much as he could eat a day regularly. Plus they had classes. He was continuing his education, and even though he was eventually started deteriorating, he essentially finished high school here. He made many friends in his photo album, in his living room. He had pictures of the friends he made, and he liked them very much, especially liked the girls. I think they liked him, and for good reason. He really enjoyed himself at the Preventorium, and he put on weight, he put on muscle mass. He was much loved. And he was so sure that he was cured that he wasn't the least bit worried, because he was growing, he was getting strong. He couldn't wait to go back for his senior year on his championship football team. Only he was tested. He was no longer non-symptomatic. I've got this reversed because I think it's his left lung that was infected, which started showing up first. Conveniently, the South Mountain Sanitarium for adults is located directly across the street from the Preventorium. That way you don't have to travel far. Only the South Mountain Sanitarium is a whole different ballgame here, because he's not with children anymore, he's with adults, and they're dying, and they're all on different levels of dying, but nobody's getting out of here the way that children were being released from the Preventorium. It's a massive institution. Till today, it's empty, it's a derelict building, but at the time it was state-of-the-art medicine. And you had a main building here, had a huge, very well-equipped hospital, and off-screen, but over there are the dormitories. But you didn't necessarily start in the dormitories. A lot of patients here in the preventorium or in the sanatorium started on the outskirts of the property where they had almost, Quonset hut-like buildings where sometimes entire families who had TB were kept. But it was determined by sex and age, and the idea was maybe if we keep you out of the general population long enough, you can beat it, or at least slow it down. So George was here for a very long time until, this actually shows you how sophisticated this was. This is the dining room, and it's a massive dining room. There's also, places to socialize, but this is where George was eating. Now, we're talking about a year and a half before he got the Cayce reading. So he would have been dining here. There were some 600 people could sit at one time. So it was a whole city in South Mountain. But there were game rooms. George loved playing cribbage. It was the first time he'd learned to play cribbage. He wasn't getting any better, so he was moved out of the outside buildings into the main ward. And this is where things obviously started getting dicey for him. Because now, he was with primarily men, and they were dying, or the various stages. He lived for visits from home. He had 9 siblings. They didn't often get to come. His mother and father, however, did come. He wrote home. We have the letters. At this point, he'd already started coughing up phlegm, bloody phlegm, started losing weight. He was probably 20 to 40 pounds thinner than when he was, 15 when he came in. Several operations were given, mostly, poking holes, sucking fluid out of his lungs. Again, these were called treatments. They were not cures. It started getting worse. The South Mountain Cemetery is located right behind the hospital, conveniently enough. So you sort of saw the direction you were going, and you were made aware of it on a very daily basis. Not only were the person you were eating with regularly, dining commons gone the next day, but it just kept deteriorating. George's favorite place was the chapel. This was his anchor. It was his family's anchor, and he found himself there quite often. This is the point. So he would have been in a year and a half, almost 2 years, that to finally arrest the development, they decided they wanted an operation to remove half the ribs on one of his lungs, collapse the lung, in hopes that maybe the disease would not spread to the other lung. Again, it was this stopgap measure. What George doesn't say in that interview, but what was the real case, was that he saw patients who had this. He knew the future. Yes, he might have added a few months to it, but as soon as you had those ribs removed, he was never playing football. People were hunched over. You could see them in the dining halls, hunched over, moving. He'd had enough. This again, he doesn't reveal this in the reading, but you dig into it and you find out what happened. He saw the writing on the wall, and he got up one morning, he took his things, and he quietly walked out of the South Mountain Sanitarium. He went out on the road, and he started hitchhiking home. Took 2 days. In fact, the first day, he got as far as a police station, and he actually walked to the police station asking if he could spend the night. And they thought he was crazy, and they didn't let him spend the night. But he got back to Steelton, got into his home, and when his family woke up in the morning, he was asleep on the sofa, and he was welcomed home. He was much loved, but the situation, of course, was very different. He was not welcome back in his school. TB is contagious. All of a sudden, he was a pariah. You know, it was like having HIV in the 80s. Physicians didn't even want you in their offices. Gradually, you know, even though certainly his parents loved him most intensely and his siblings were committed to him, he gradually came to understand the hardship that he was bringing on his family. And again, you know, let's look at examine some of those things Nancy was saying. Concern for others. Concern for others was so deeply ingrained into him. He knew that if he stayed home, it was just going to make his family suffer. His friends wouldn't take him into their homes anymore. So he resigned himself and he returned to South Mountain. He returned to South Mountain to die. I mean, he knew it. He had dropped 40 pounds at this point. He was coughing blood. One of his friends, and he references in the interview he did, Howard Romer. Howard Romer was a Presbyterian seminarian who had TB, who almost had an identical stage, which is why they were in the same ward. Howard also taught George to play cribbage. George subsequently forgot how to play cribbage. But they became good friends, and it was Howard who was sent a copy of There Is a River. And so Howard would read it aloud, he would talk about it, and George literally just snapped it out of his hand. And he started reading it, he loved this, he said, my gosh, if anybody's going to help, it's going to be Edgar Cayce. And he immediately, literally 48 hours later, there's a letter off to Edgar Cayce. We have it up the hill in the vault. Dear Mr. Cayce, I have been told that a sum of $20 is asked of members. I do get a few dollars from my mother now and then, and if need be, could fall back upon her. However, I'd like to repay my own debt. If you gave me a reading that resulted in a cure, I'd offer you my services for 8 hours of every day for 1 year. Helping my fellow man. In the event that no cure occurred, I would try handiwork that might bring in a few dollars. This money I would send in the hopes that another would perhaps be benefited. You probably understand my reason for the preceding sentence is not because of any lack of charity. My health would require a stoppage at this point. In other words, you know, he wanted to help and he was willing to help for as long as he humanly could, but he knew there would come a point where even handiwork was not possible. What's so remarkable about this letter, and we have the letter, we have envelopes, we have much of his entire file, is that he taped 25 cents to him, his allowance. And if you look at the subsequent correspondence between he and Edgar, you know, there's 35 cents, there's a money order for $4 because his friends, you know, have helped out. Anyway, so he sends the letter. If he had any knowledge of what was going on in Virginia Beach at the time, likely the letter would not have been sent. After There Is a River came out, you know, correspondence was arriving by mail sacks. But this was one of those rare opportunities when Edgar Cayce walked into the mailroom. They had a dedicated mailroom at this point, and he looked at the stack of letters, and he said, I want that one. And he went over and he pulled it out. So Edgar Cayce sends an application. George fills it out along with another letter, you know. I don't know if this was a 35-cent one or not, but you know, and including application you so graciously forwarded. Thank you very much for your kindness. Though I am without funds at the moment, I shall not forget to realize my indebtedness to you when I am able. You know, it's constantly thinking of others throughout all of this. It's so touching. Your letter failed to mention whether or not the distance reading for me is suitable or not to you. In other words, can he do it at a distance? Can he do it from Virginia Beach? Will you let me know in your next letter? In anticipation of your reading, my excitement really can't be described. I'll do anything in regards to it that will allow the most convenience for you. Again, you know, his heart is in the right place, you see it. And we know that those who requested readings from Cayce, who genuinely wanted help from their hearts, you know, where there wasn't any kind of hidden agenda, got the results. Maybe that's why Cayce pulled the letter out. Edgar writes back, have yours of the 31st with application. We'll try this for you, George, on the afternoon of the 8th of July. Be sure and let me know where you will be at that hour, and you keep that period in prayer and meditation, and make a list of questions that you would like to have answered for you about your condition. Just hope and pray that we may be of so much help to you in this as the information has proven for so many, many others with similar conditions, namely Edgar's own wife. Hoping to be the means of help. You know, if this doesn't, you know, if this correspondence alone doesn't exhibit exactly what Nancy was talking about, the spirit, the intention in which you do things. So this is right from Cayce's day calendar, right here in our vault. You know, July 8th. George E. Conjar, physical reading, 3-month wait. You know, it's amazing that he even got on the calendar at all, because there were some who were waiting 2 years at this point for a reading. But George somehow got moved up seriously on the list. He was very concerned about Edgar finding him. So in subsequent letters, he said, I'm going to be in the ward by the window, I'm going to be in the bed by the window, I'm going to be in the chair by the window. It doesn't turn out to be a chair, because by the time the reading was given, he was in bed and he wasn't getting out of bed. It was a very long wait. Twice while waiting for this reading, he collapsed and essentially died and had to be revived. You know, he was down now, you know, at 40 pounds. I mean, it was the seriousness of this tragedy, the reality of it, you know, doesn't come through until you go a little deeper. And if that's not enough, the day before the reading, the very day before the reading, George is so excited about the reading to come, he tells his doctor. Dr. Custer is not happy. He is not a happy kid. He doesn't want what he describes as the hysteria to spread through his sanatorium. He wants to know who has told him about Edgar Cayce. He wants it to stop. He goes to great lengths to stop it. He does everything he possibly can in his power to talk George out of getting this reading. On top of which he's telling him, you're doing fine, George. You're doing fine. Yes, he's doing fine. He's not dying as quickly as he was expected to die. They have an appointment the next day. Edgar's already done the reading. Virginia Beach, the reading was given. Sends it to South Mountain immediately. This is sort of washed out, so you really can't see it, but essentially what Edgar says is that, yes, it's a very serious infection. You're at the critical advanced stage. But there is a possibility of hope. But you've got to get to this stuff right away. You've got to do the treatments right away. George left the sanitarium the very day, or at least the day after he received that reading. He is home. This is his first letter from home. By Friday the following week, I expect to have everything in readiness and to be able to begin my cure. I am also enclosing $4. This is a lot of money for this family and for George. Closing $4, which I have managed to save from my allowance. Soon I hope to send you money regularly, first to try and pay in part for what you are doing for me, and secondly, in the hopes that with it you may be helped by me in the continuing of your work for your fellow man. George gets it. Thank you very much for your kindness. I can't express my gratitude appropriately. Even this is the next challenge he faces. They've got to get a charred oak keg. You can't just buy it at headquarters anymore. So Edgar's family, they get the money, they send a letter to a company for a charred oak keg describing how it's to be used. They get back a letter almost immediately saying, thank you for your request, but we cannot fill your order. These charred oak kegs are not to be used for medicinal purposes. George, in his interview, describes being so crushed that he went up the stairs and he collapsed into his bed, collapsed into his pillow in absolute agony and in tears, because he'd come this far and he didn't look like the end. The next morning, a keg mysteriously arrived on his front doorstep from the same company he wrote the letter to. They could not sell him one. But they could give him one. Again, the Lord's working mysterious ways. The next little challenge, not as much as getting the charred oak keg, is getting the apple brandy. They don't sell it in Pennsylvania. They sell Applejack. Well, it's the same. His brother takes off, gets it in Maryland. Plenty of fish. The sisters are the ones out getting the food, getting the nutrients. The entire family. He had a whole team, he had a whole army pulling for him, doing these things, and that's really how he got through it. Yellow vegetables, of course, we know. Stewed chicken, eat the bones and all. Raw milk. Calcium supplements. They stuck to it. They went right to it. George reports in the very first 3 weeks of doing this reading, he reported some odd, unusual physical behavior, and he didn't know if it was good or bad, but something was happening. He felt a buzzing. He felt an energy going through his system. He felt dizzy. He felt lightheaded. There was something happening. Something was working on him. Also during this period, which took several interviews, back in the 90s for him to talk about and touch on, was that one night he felt a presence in his room at the foot of his bed. He didn't know what, but he felt it there, watching. What you've done for me, I'll never be able to repay you for. I thank God for letting me come into contact with you. If God is willing that my health be restored through you, it will make me, I believe, happier than anyone on this earth. I already am ecstatically happy for what has already come to me. He doesn't yet know if he's going to be cured or not. In his writing to Edgar Cayce, thank you. Again, the whole team is at work. Edgar writes back, you are going to have days when you won't feel so good, but I sincerely believe from past experience that if you will do the reading suggested for you and don't overdo it, you are going to get real results, and I know that you will be a new and happy man, and I am looking forward to meeting you. He is. There's a relationship being built up. Edgar invites him to Virginia Beach. George writes back, I'll come to Virginia Beach and thank you personally. It won't be an inadequate thank you, since I can't even begin to put into speech such a great thanks as I feel. Gratitude is the attitude. I am in need of spiritual help as well as physical, and since I've come to know you, I know, much better spiritually and feel much better physically. Okay, so what arrives next in the mail? Because now they're talking about spirituality. The ARE sends him a search for God. George writes back, it was like receiving a rare pearl after having already been given a rare diamond. He gets it. You're so very good. No matter what I am or ever shall be, I shall never forget the kindness you've shown me, nor the joy you've given me, nor will I ever stop working to strengthen myself spiritually so that I may duplicate part of this kindness towards another. Boy, does he get it. I want you to know that whatever the outcome, I am a much happier man for having met you and will always be. This is the message that's coming through. All right. His last letter to Edgar Cayce. Well, second to last. It has been almost 5 months since I began treatment, and I certainly must say I feel great. He's out of bed. My heart owes you much, not only for my physical reading, but also for the spiritual help I've received. My life cannot help but be happy. He's already asking in the same letter whether he can get up and go outside now, whether he can help work. He feels good. This is miraculous. 5 months ago, this man was dying in the hospital, and now he's up and about and he's asking Ed Cayce, how soon can I get to go to work? I want to meet you. We're going to make some, So the second reading was done, and this one, it's only a couple pages long, and it was very fast. This is the index. You've all seen these indexes. What I want you to pay attention to is what's at the very end of this reading, because it really tells so much the full story. It shows the source knows a whole lot more that's going on here than even Edgar Cayce knows. Keep continually the constructive, I can't read it now, thinking within itself and within that which it would do for others. For it is the, I can't see it. For it is the manner ye treat thy fellow man, ye treat thy maker. Take time to be holy. You have made promises to self, to thy maker, to thy friends. Remember what thou hast vowed, keep. For the Lord hath need of those honest with themselves. Tells the story. Okay, so George goes back in. He's now had 25 or so. I may have gotten the number wrong, but that's what sticks out. X-rays, and he's never had one X-ray in his entire life come back positive, and he gets X-rayed. He's healed. One lung is severely scarred, calcified, but there is no infection. The other lung is perfectly healthy. He writes back, he is so happy, he's now saving money, he's doing handiwork, he's moving around the house, he's saving money for a trip because he wants to thank Edgar in person. But, it's a challenge for several reasons. Both, this is World War II, both his brothers are now drafted into the war, they're not home. George is now head of the household. He's trying to support his mother. He's trying to raise money, coins at a time, to go visit Edgar in Virginia Beach to thank him personally. He finally gets the train ticket, the money for a train ticket. Edgar's dead. Gladys writes back. So, what happened with George? George immediately went back to school, got a business degree from the Pennsylvania Business College. I think that's in Harrisburg. He often dressed in his brother's army uniform just to avoid questions about where he was during the war. He certainly wasn't going to talk about TB. He would be a pariah. So it was an onerous thing, and his whole family held that secret. He took a job. He got a job almost immediately with a Harrisburg appliance dealership, a very big one which grew, and he was very good at it. He loved life. He woke up every morning like this was going to be his last, and he loved his clients, and they loved him back, and he did exceptionally well. The very first day at the job, when he was being shown around, he met Jacqueline, the woman whom he would marry. And the way he described it is, he was walking, through this hallway, and this woman came up and she had a whole pile of files which she promptly dropped in front of him. Oh my gosh! and he, of course, knelt and helped her pick it up, and they got to talking, and it continued on. Very devoted, not only to his family, but to the church. Her sister became a nun. But very, very devoted to the church. George and Jacqueline had children. He stuck by his promises. This was hard to pull out, but the first third of every check he got went to support his mother. His father was dead, died very early on, but his first third of his paycheck went to his mother, second went to his own family to support his wife and his children, and the third immediately went to charity, the church, along with his time. A third of his time. Helping the homeless, going to Harrisburg on weekends, on Sunday, after Mass. And this is a man who literally went to Mass at 6 a.m. every morning before he went to work, saying prayers, gratitude. It meant something. They lived a very happy life. The interesting and important thing to my mind is he never told her. He never told her he had TB. He didn't tell his employer he had TB. And why? Because he was afraid of what they would say. What they would certainly didn't talk about Edgar Cayce. This was literally like having HIV in George's generation. She always knew he had a deep, dark secret. She didn't know what it was. She suspected that it was because he was a draft dodger. And she didn't want to know. She didn't want to press it. But, they didn't talk about it. They had a great life. They had great friends. He enjoyed life. He embraced life. There was joy. Joy followed through. He was important in the Knights of Columbus. Hell if I know what's going on in this church. Why he's leading the Romans into Jerusalem. Maybe somebody can explain that to me. The family traveled extensively. They loved life. And then along came grandchildren. That looks like Hotel Coronado in California. He embraced life. He loved life. Eventually came great-grandchildren. He lived a very rich, long life. And in 1998, he was reading the Sunday religious supplement of the Harrisburg newspaper, and there's a book review about a guy in Virginia Beach, Edgar Cayce. He goes, oh my God. He had no idea that anyone even remembered who Edgar Cayce was. And now, gosh, there's somebody had written a book about this guy. He had no idea there was an organization. He had no idea that this whole work had ever continued. He had no idea, and he burst into tears. He just broke up, and Jacqueline came and, to him, wanted to know what the hell's wrong. And he fessed up, and he said, that secret I had, I had a reading from this man. And he brought his children, brought his son first, brought his daughters. He invited him in, and he started talking about it. His 74th birthday, what's his son give him for a birthday present? A jarred oak cake. I love it, and so he lived a great, long, very prosperous life, much loved, but his one regret was he never got to say thanks to Edgar, which is why he's here today. Which is why we want to pay tribute to him, because this is really what embodies why we're really here, why we're together, why we celebrate this, and why we share it. George, please.
Thank you.
Are you sure we can't talk you into coming up just welcome to Conjar. Maybe just come up and welcome us to Conjar. Come help your dad.